The history of post-colonial Africa is marked by leaders whose rule reflected the turbulence, hope and fragility of newly independent states, yet few figures have cast as long and troubling a shadow as Idi Amin Dada. Rising from the margins of Uganda's northern territories to become one of the most infamous rulers of the 20th century, Amin's regime between 1971 and 1979 stands as a defining example of how personal ambition, military power, ethnic divisions, and global geopolitical pressures can converge to produce catastrophic governance. His life story, from an ill-defined childhood in the colonial periphery to his brutal dictatorship and eventual exile, unfolds against the backdrop of Uganda's struggle to define its identity after the end of British rule. Understanding Idi Amin requires more than recounting the violence and chaos that characterized his years in power. It demands an investigation into the colonial military structures that shaped him, the political rivalries that propelled him forward, and the internal and external forces that enabled his rise. Equally important is an examination of the human toll of his leadership, the hundreds of thousands of lives lost, the communities shattered, and the economic devastation that lingered long after his fall. Amin's rule was not merely an aberration, but a reflection of deeper fissures within Uganda's early political landscape, amplified by the wider dynamics of the Cold War and shifting alliances in Africa and beyond. Idi Amin Dada was born sometime between 1925 and 1928 in the remote and underdeveloped West Nile region of northern Uganda, an area dominated by the Kakwa, Lugbara, and other Nilotic groups historically marginalized under British rule. His childhood unfolded during the final decades of British colonial administration, a period defined by the extraction of resources, forced labor schemes, and the political sidelining of northern ethnic communities. Amin's father, Amin Dada Sr., reportedly separated from the family early, leaving his mother, Asa Ata, to raise him. She belonged to a community of healers within the Kakwa and was said to be a herbalist and spiritual figure, influences that later shaped Amin's interest in mysticism and ritual. Amin grew up in an environment of limited schooling and economic opportunity. He attended several years of primary education in Bombo, but never progressed far academically, and he spent much of his youth herding goats, working odd jobs, and navigating the harsh conditions that defined northern Ugandan life. The colonial military, the King's African Rifles, KAR, offered advancement for young men without formal education, especially those from the north whom British officers considered disciplined, hardy, and physically imposing. For Amin, the army was the gateway out of obscurity. Amin joined the KAR around 1946. His early years in the regiment were shaped by the lingering effects of World War II, Britain's shrinking empire, and the growing African independence movements emerging across the continent. Amin first served as a cook and labourer, but his athleticism, strength and eagerness to participate in field operations caught the attention of British commanders, who steadily promoted him despite his limited literacy. Between the late 1940s and early 1950s, Amin was deployed to Somalia and Kenya, where the British were engaged in violent counterinsurgency campaigns. His most notable service occurred during the Mau Mau Uprising, 1952-1960, when colonial authorities brutally suppressed Kikuyu rebels fighting for land and political rights. Amin proved effective in the field, but his reputation for excessive force grew. Reports from British officers accused him of brutality, including alleged beatings, torture, and mistreatment of civilians, complaints that were quietly buried because the empire needed loyal African soldiers to sustain its increasingly unpopular rule. Despite controversy, Amin rose to the rank of sergeant major and later lieutenant, becoming one of the highest-ranking indigenous soldiers in the KAR by the dawn of Ugandan independence. His rise unfolded in parallel with Uganda's political transformation. As the independent state approached, the British accelerated the Africanization of the army, believing that figures like Amin would be essential in stabilizing the post-colonial state. By 1962, Uganda emerged as an independent nation under a coalition headed by Prime Minister Milton Obote. Amin, already a prominent military figure, became a crucial pillar of the new state. The early years of Ugandan independence were turbulent. Ethnic rivalries, competing political factions, and constitutional tensions between the central government and Buganda Kingdom created instability. Prime Minister Obote relied increasingly on the army to maintain control, and Amin's role expanded dramatically. Amin and Obote initially forged a close relationship. The two collaborated in covert operations, including smuggling arms to Congolese rebels during the Congo crisis. These activities enriched segments of the military and strengthened Amin's influence. By the mid-1960s, he had become deputy commander and later commander of the Ugandan Army and Air Force. However, the alliance began to fracture. Obote grew suspicious of Amin's popularity within the military, his recruitment of loyalists from northern ethnic groups, and his accumulation of personal wealth. Meanwhile, Amin resented Obote's attempts to oversee army finances and feared being sidelined. The breaking point came in 1966, when Obote suspended the constitution, declared himself executive president, and used Amin's troops to attack the Kabaka's palace in Kampala, forcing the Buganda king into exile. While Amin had been instrumental in helping Obote consolidate power, the president began to perceive him as a threat. By late 1970, tensions escalated into open hostility, and rumors circulated that Obote planned to arrest Amin. Amin acted first. On the 25th of January 1971, while Obote attended a Commonwealth conference in Singapore, Amin launched a swift and well-organized military coup. Tanks and soldiers seized strategic sites in Kampala, and Amin addressed the nation over radio, presenting himself as the reluctant patriot forced to intervene to prevent corruption, tribal favoritism, and authoritarianism. Many Ugandans, weary of political turmoil, welcomed the coup. The international community reacted cautiously but generally favorably. Britain and Israel recognized the new government. The United States signaled cooperation. Amin projected an image of a humble, apolitical soldier, promising free elections and the restoration of democracy. These promises evaporated within months. Amin's government transformed into a militarized, authoritarian regime. Civil liberties dissolved, political activity was banned, and the State Research Bureau, Amin's notorious secret police, became the center of a new system of surveillance, torture, and disappearances. The purging of Obote loyalists began almost immediately. In August 1972, Amin made a shocking and economically devastating decision. He ordered the expulsion of Uganda's entire Asian population, giving them 90 days to depart. Asians, many holding British passports, formed the backbone of Uganda's commercial class. Amin claimed he was restoring wealth to indigenous Ugandans, but the decision was rooted in anti-colonial rhetoric, personal resentment, and political calculation. He later theatrically proclaimed that the order had come to him in a dream. The economic consequences were disastrous. Factories, plantations, and shops collapsed under mismanagement after being redistributed to military officers and political supporters. Uganda's currency inflated dramatically, essential goods vanished, and black markets flourished. Meanwhile, Amin's purges intensified. Rival ethnic groups, especially the Acholi and Langi, were targeted. Disappearances became routine and bodies accumulated in the Nile and Lake Victoria. Amin's behavior grew increasingly erratic. He frequently reshuffled his cabinet, promoting or eliminating ministers with dizzying speed. He embraced the language of absolute power, granting himself extravagant titles such as President for Life and Conqueror of the British Empire. His speeches veered between humor, menace, and megalomania. As Uganda's economy deteriorated and internal dissent grew, Amin sought foreign allies. His ideology swung dramatically depending on circumstance. He courted Israel early in his rule, but later expelled Israelis and embraced Libya's Muammar Gaddafi, receiving financial and military support. He cultivated ties with the Soviet Union and the Palestinians, positioning himself as a champion of anti-imperialist struggle. By 1975 to 1976, Amin's regime had become internationally notorious. The turning point in global opinion came with the Entebbe hijacking in July 1976, when Palestinian militants diverted an Air France flight to Entebbe airport with Amin's permission. The incident ended with Israel's daring Operation Thunderbolt, in which Israeli commandos rescued most hostages and humiliated Amin by destroying Ugandan aircraft on the tarmac. Amin retaliated by killing several civilians connected to the incident, deepening his international isolation. At home, Amin's paranoia spiraled, purges multiplied, senior officers were executed on vague accusations, ethnic tensions intensified, the economy collapsed further, and state structures eroded. By the late 1970s, Uganda had become a shell of a nation, sustained by patronage, fear, and the remnants of foreign assistance. The end approached in 1978, when Amin launched a reckless invasion of Tanzania's Kagera region. The attack was motivated by internal crises, falling popularity, military defections, and economic ruin. Amin hoped that a foreign war would unify the country. The plan backfired. Tanzania, led by Julius Nyerere, responded with a full-scale counter-offensive, joined by Ugandan exiles who had fled Amin's purges. The Tanzanian army, well-disciplined, well-trained, and motivated, advanced steadily north. Amin's forces collapsed in disarray, undermined by corruption, incompetence, and low morale. In April 1979, Tanzanian and Ugandan rebel forces entered Kampala. Amin fled first to Libya and then to Saudi Arabia, where he was granted asylum. His government officially collapsed soon after. For many Ugandans, the fall of Amin marked the beginning of a painful process of reconstruction, accountability, and national recovery. Amin spent the remainder of his life in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, protected by the kingdom on the condition that he abstained from political activities. He lived comfortably but quietly, occasionally giving interviews in which he portrayed his rule as benevolent and denied responsibility for atrocities. He never expressed remorse. He died on 16th of August 2003 of kidney failure, leaving behind a complicated family with numerous wives and children scattered across Uganda and abroad. Idi Amin's legacy is a deep and multifaceted scar on Uganda's history. His regime left behind devastated institutions, broken communities, and the loss of hundreds of thousands of lives. The economic ruin he caused required decades of reconstruction. Ethnic tensions amplified by his violent purges took years to untangle. His unpredictable cruelty became a global emblem of African dictatorship, one that unfairly overshadowed Africa's diverse political realities, but accurately represented the dangers of absolute power. In Uganda, collective memory remains mixed with trauma and silence. Older generations recall disappearances, fear, and economic collapse. Younger Ugandans encounter his legacy through stories, testimonies, and the ongoing work of national healing. Historians continue to examine his rule not as an isolated episode of madness, but as a product of colonial militarization, post-independence fragility, Cold War global politics, and the ambitions of a man who rose too quickly and wielded violence too freely. Amin's story endures because it is a warning. It reminds us that states built on fear cannot endure, that militarized governance is inherently unstable, and that charismatic authoritarianism always ends in destruction. History cannot undo the suffering of those years, but it can illuminate the path that led to them and help ensure that such a chapter is never repeated. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe to Blistering History.